I've always believed that respect in a family isn't a one-time gift. It's something you feed, water, and nurture like a garden. I'm 68 now, a retired English teacher, living in the same modest 3-bedroom house I bought with my late husband 40 years ago. The walls hold our history, graduation photos, vacation snapshots, even the small handprints my son Paul pressed into the cement walkway when he was 5. I've always considered myself fortunate, good health, a comfortable pension, and enough in savings to not only take care of myself, but help Paul and his wife, Cheryl, whenever they needed it. And they always needed it. I didn't mind at first. That's what mothers do, right? Help when the rent is short, cover an unexpected repair, pitch in for the down payment on a house. When Cheryl's car broke down, I paid for the new one. When they wanted to start renovations, I wrote the check. Paul's job paid well enough, but Cheryl had expensive tastes and a knack for convincing him that investments in their lifestyle were just as important as actual investments. I never once asked for repayment. I thought love was a kind of bank account. You put in what you can, and when you need it, it will be there for you. I was wrong. The dinner was held in their new dining room, which Cheryl had insisted on remodeling last year on my dime. The space was a glossy magazine spread brought to life, deep mahogany table, gold-rimmed plates, the faint scent of vanilla candles mixing with roasted lamb. 8 place settings gleamed under the warm chandelier, every detail curated for the evening. The occasion was Cheryl's promotion to regional director at her company. I arrived with a bottle of Merlot I knew she liked, dressed in my best navy dress and the silver brooch Paul had given me for my 60th birthday. I'd even had my hair done that morning, wanting to look my best for her big night. When I walked in, Cheryl greeted me with her usual air kiss and a quick scan of my outfit, as if to make sure I'd passed some unspoken dress code. "Sabrina," she said, all smile and teeth. "So glad you could make it. We have so much to celebrate tonight." I handed her the wine. "Congratulations again. You've worked hard for this." "Yes," she said, taking the bottle without really looking at me. Not everyone gets to feel the rush of achievement when they've truly earned something. She held my gaze just a little too long before turning to place the wine on the counter. We sat down, the table filling with laughter and chatter. Cheryl sat at the head, Paul on her right, me beside him. Across from me was Melanie, one of Cheryl's colleagues, perfect hair, perfect nails, perfect timing when it came to laughing at Cheryl's jokes. Next to Melanie was Paul's friend Darren, who looked like he'd rather be at a sports bar. The rest were Cheryl's work friends, people I'd never met before and would probably never see again. Cheryl started and almost immediately. "It's been a whirlwind," she told the table, recounting every detail of her climb up the corporate ladder. Late nights, hard calls, making the tough decisions. Her eyes flicked to me again. Not everyone could handle it. I mean, some people enjoy a slower pace. I smiled faintly, choosing to sip my water instead of answering. She pressed on, each remark wrapped in sugar, but with a barbed hook underneath. "I imagine retirement must be relaxing," she said. "No more deadlines, no more responsibilities. Just, well, waiting." Paul shifted in his chair. My grandson Evan, sitting at the far end, focused intently on his mashed potatoes. "I keep busy," I said evenly. "Gardening, book club, a little volunteering at the library." "Of course," Cheryl said with mock sympathy. But still, no real accomplishments left to chase. That must be strange. She swirled her wine, as if the conversation bored her already. It's like the chapter in the story where the main character starts to fade into the background. The table chuckled, some uncomfortably, some without thinking. I took a slow breath. Life has many chapters, Cheryl. Some of the most meaningful happen after the career is over. Her smile sharpened. True. But I was just wondering. She leaned forward, elbows on the pristine white tablecloth. How is it really? To be a nobody? It landed like a slap. The air thinned, and I could hear nothing but the clink of cutlery and the faint hum of the chandelier overhead. Paul gave a weak laugh, glancing between us. Melanie's eyes darted away, suddenly very interested in her plate. I set my wine glass down carefully. My voice was calm, almost conversational. Well, Cheryl, if I'm a nobody, then you might want to think about what that means for you. Because starting tonight, this nobody will no longer be paying your bills. Silence. Not the polite pause before laughter, the kind that falls when people aren't sure what's just happened. Cheryl's smile froze, her hand halfway to her glass. Paul blinked at me, his mouth opening and closing like he might protest, but couldn't find the words. "I beg your pardon?" Cheryl said finally, her voice brittle. "You heard me." I rose, smoothing the skirt of my dress. "I've been covering your emergencies, your upgrades, your celebrations for years. But apparently, I've outlived my usefulness." Melanie glanced between us, clearly uncomfortable. Darren cleared his throat. Nobody said a word in my defense. I picked up my purse from the back of my chair. "Enjoy your evening," I said, and walked toward the front door. Behind me, I heard Cheryl hiss to Paul, "She's bluffing." I didn't turn around. The night air was cool against my face as I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not happy, not yet, but free in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. When I got home, I sat in my quiet living room, staring at the family photos on the mantel. I thought about every check I'd written, every bill I'd covered, every time I'd said, "Don't worry, I've got it." It was over now. No more handouts, no more rescues. And I couldn't help but wonder, without my money to prop them up, how long before the cracks in their perfect little life began to show. I didn't sleep much after that dinner. Pride is a terrible substitute for rest, but it does something useful. It keeps you upright when the ground is shifting. By sunrise, I'd made coffee and walked straight to the room I still call the office, though it's really a cramped spare bedroom with a scarred oak desk, a wobbly lamp, and a filing cabinet older than Paul. I pulled the bottom drawer open and heard the familiar squeal of metal, my own little alarm clock for accountability. Inside were the red, blue, and manila folders I'd been feeding for years. I'm a retired teacher. I document. I date stamp. I leave notes to my future self in tidy margins. I never realized those habits would become a ledger of how I slowly bled myself for a family that laughed at me over lamb shanks. Mortgage top-ups. I set those to one side. Car loans, 3 of them in Cheryl's name, but co-signed by me. College savings, bridges, when Evan's tuition spiked, and then again when his little sister, Maddie, decided on a pricier program across the state. Medical bills from that winter Paul slipped a disc, and the insurance reviewed everything into oblivion. The Florida vacation after Cheryl's burnout. The kitchen renovation that somehow needed imported tiles. The childcare stopgap when they were between nannies. A Peloton because it's cheaper than a gym membership over time, Mom. The math of hope is always slippery. I made piles, then subpiles. Then I opened a spreadsheet on my ancient laptop, the one Paul kept telling me to replace. Maybe he liked me a little out of date. I typed in numbers until my knuckles ached. 15 years. I totaled each column, double-checked the receipts, cross-referenced the bank statements, and added the interest I had paid on my own HELOC to cover their emergencies that were never emergencies. When the sum appeared, I sat back hard enough to make the chair protest. $948,620.37. Almost $1 million. My breath went shallow. I put my fingertips to the number like it might smear, like a trick of the screen would make it smaller, kinder. It didn't. On a shelf above the desk, between a ceramic apple from my teaching days and a cracked souvenir mug, sits a little wooden box where I've kept scraps of paper over the years, recipes in my mother's handwriting, ticket stubs, sticky notes of things I plan to do someday. Paint the porch. See Santa Fe in the spring. Join the watercolor class at the community center. Replace the roof before it becomes an emergency. They were small, ordinary plans, quiet ones a woman allows herself after a life of big, loud responsibilities. I ran a thumb along the lid and realized I had funded everyone else's somedays at the expense of my own. I'm not perfect. I didn't give out of pure selflessness. Part of me loved being needed, being the person who could fix things with a transfer or a signature. Part of me was still the young mother afraid that disappointment might break her son into pieces she couldn't gather up. And part of me, the foolish part, believed gratitude would eventually arrive with flowers and a card instead of entitlement and a smirk. I opened a fresh page in my notebook, dated it, underlined it twice. Action list. I wrote every company and bank and service in a neat column, then added the last 4 digits of each account and the way the money left me ACH, auto debit, bill pay, standing order. I added renewal dates and hidden traps, the annual maintenance, fees on that premium credit card Paul swore paid for itself, the auto-renew for their streaming services that had inexplicably landed in my wallet during the pandemic, the warehouse club membership, because we all benefit, Mom. I noted who I'd need to speak with, the bank manager, the credit union clerk, the mortgage servicer, the student account office, the orthodontist's billing lady who always sounded like she was trying to sell me a timeshare. I made a second column labeled documents needed, driver's license, account statements, letters of authorization, mine, revocation letters, also mine, the durable POA I'd let Paul use once after his back surgery, long expired, but still. I wanted it in front of me when I made calls in case anyone tried to be clever. Then I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Morning, Sabrina, came the voice of Leon Ward, an accountant who used to do our taxes when my husband was alive. Leon is a quiet, meticulous man who plays chess at the senior center on Thursdays and brings fresh cinnamon rolls to anyone who happens to be nearby. To what do I owe the pleasure? I need a sanity check, I said, reading him the total and the shape of my plan. He whistled softly. You've been funding a small city. I've been funding a story I told myself, I said. Can you look over a few cancellation letters? Make sure I'm not missing any legal lingo. Email them, he said. I'll mark them up at lunch. Leon, I added, this might get loud. You're doing the quiet work before the noise, he said. That's the right order. I hung up, printed a small mountain of statements, and wrote the letters, short, firm, dated. Please accept this notice to terminate the automatic debit. This is my formal revocation of any and all previous authorizations, effective immediately. I signed each one with a steady hand. Then I stacked them by category and paperclipped them with the kind of satisfaction teachers pursue in the wild. That night, I slept like a person who had finally confessed the truth to herself. The next morning, I dressed for war in a cardigan and comfortable shoes, put the letters in a canvas tote, and drove to my credit union. The woman at the front desk, her name tag said Alicia, was new to me. Early 30s, glossy braids, a little gold hoop in one ear. She had the soft but done-with-it energy of someone who has heard every excuse in the world and can smell one arriving. How can I help you today, Ms. Rivera? I need to end a lot of automatic payments, I said, and put a hold on any new external links being added to my accounts without my written consent. Alicia's eyebrows flicked up in appreciation. Yes, ma'am. Let's sit down. We went line by line. The joint card that was never joint, just authorized users, I'd allowed out of panic one Christmas. The monthly $600 that crept out under the innocent name of a family cell plan Paul had added tablet lines for the kids, then a smartwatch for Cheryl, then upgraded everyone to the premier tier. The utilities at their house I'd kept paying during a rough patch that lasted 3 years. The Helic auto debit attached to work I didn't live in and didn't enjoy. Do you want to keep any of these? Alicia asked gently, as if we were choosing keepsakes after a house fire. No, I said. Not a single one. She printed confirmations. Each click of her keyboard felt like a stitch closing a wound. From there, I went to First National, where I'd always dealt with Harold, a patient, the spectacled branch manager who wore sweater vests like armor. I slid my letters across his desk. You're sure? He asked after reading them all. You've been very generous. Generosity requires respect, I said. I've confirmed I have only one. Harold nodded. We'll code your profile for verbal password required and no third-party additions. You'll get a text if anyone tries. Good, I said. I'm changing the password, too. I did, to something even I would need to write down. I took a break in the car to eat a granola bar and sip lukewarm coffee, then started the calls no one likes making. The mortgage servicer put me on hold for 2 cheerful songs and 1 grim one. When Shauna finally picked up, her voice was brisk but kind. I'm terminating the auto payments I set up on an account that is not in my name, I said. Do you have authorization to make changes? She asked, defaulting to script. I'm the one who authorized the payments, I said. I'm revoking that authorization. I read her the letter. She processed it, told me there would be no penalties, and emailed confirmation before we hung up. The student accounts office at the university was easier, Dev, a harried graduate assistant who said ma'am every other word, switched my sponsor status off, and sent a receipt. The medical billing office, Arlene, who knew me too well by now, sounded almost relieved. Sweetheart, you've done more than enough, she said, lowering her voice as if we were co-conspirators. We'll send future bills straight to the patient. The streaming bundle took 3 tries and 1 chatbot that called me Sabrina without the R twice, but finally Prisha from customer care found the buried toggle and clicked it off. The gym, the pest control, the landscaping service that billed me for their house because the accounts got mixed up a while back. Unmixed. By noon, I had a neat stack of confirmations, a folder of PDFs in my inbox, and a sudden, dizzying quiet in my head. Money has a sound, you know. It hums when it leaves you, even when you pretend you don't hear it. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store. Mrs. Nguyen, who manages the floral section and has been sliding me day-old peonies at a discount for years, waved. Something special today? She asked. Yes, I said, surprising myself with the lump in my throat. Me, I bought a small bouquet and a jar of good olives. At home, I put the flowers in water, slid the confirmations into the completed section of my folder, and wrote at the top of my notebook page in red ink, all transfers stopped. The phone stayed quiet that afternoon. Maybe the notices hadn't hit yet. Maybe denial is a long hallway before the shouting starts. Either way, the house felt lighter. I walked out to the porch, sat on the steps, and watched a pair of neighborhood kids race bikes down the hill with reckless joy. For the first time in a long time, I wondered what I might do with a weekend that didn't include saving anyone. I'm not naive. This won't end with a bouquet and an apology. Cheryl doesn't do apologies. She does optics. Paul, my boy who always wanted the shortest line between comfort and tomorrow he'll call when the draft bounces. He'll say, Mom, in that wounded way that's really a demand. He'll say it wasn't the right time. He'll say I've misunderstood. Maybe I have, in a way. I misunderstood who I was to them. I used to be the safety net. Today, I cut the ropes. Tomorrow, they'll look down and find out how high they really are. The first sign that my financial weather had changed didn't come from Paul or Cheryl. It came from the silence. By mid-morning, no buzzing notifications from banks asking to verify a new device, no furtive text from Paul with a single word, Mom. That always meant money. I watered the spider plant on the kitchen window and waited for the storm I knew was rolling in. It arrived at 12:07 p.m., disguised as politeness. Hi, Ms. Rivera, a woman chirped. This is Shauna from Southview Mortgage. We attempted your usual transfer and it's been canceled, I finished. Yes, that authorization is revoked. You'll need to contact the borrowers directly. A pause. Understood. We'll notify them. At 12:22, my cell lit up with Paul in big blue letters. I let it ring, finished buttering toast, and only then answered. Mom, what did you do? No hello. Just panic hustled into a sentence. I updated my accounts, I said. From now on, you'll pay your own expenses. A beat. I could hear the clatter of Cheryl's new cookware in the background and the murmur of her voice feeding him lines. But you can't just, this is the mortgage, Mom. It's due today. You've had 15 years to prepare for today, I said evenly. You'll manage. She says, he hissed, away from the receiver, then louder. Cheryl says this is retaliatory. Over dinner. It's corrective, I said. Over years. I could feel him reaching for old routes, pity, guilt, the short lane to yesterday. You know I'm between projects. I know what cash flow is, I said. I taught high school seniors to read balance sheets before they could parallel park. He exhaled, a small, sharp sound. So this is it? This is me keeping a promise I made to myself that night, I said. No more rescues. Cheryl wants to talk to you, he said, and there she was already at full speed. Sabrina, Cheryl's voice came bright and brittle, the way glass glows right before it shatters. I'm not sure what game you think you're playing, but you're destroying this family. Families are resilient, I thought. Entitlements are fragile. Not paying your mortgage is not the same as destroying a family, I said. It's the opposite if you think about it. I'm putting responsibility back where it belongs. You humiliated me in front of my colleagues, she snapped. Do you have any idea how that looked? Then you pull this stunt? The mortgage, the utilities, school accounts. Do you want Evan and Maddie to suffer? Evan is 20, I said. Maddie is 19. They can learn what you refuse to model, that bills are not fairy tales and grandma isn't a verb. You promised, she shot back. When we bought this house, you said you'd help until things stabilized. And you promised to stabilize, I said quietly. I said I'd help you get your footing. I didn't agree to be your shoes for life. Silence. I pictured her calculating the angles, shame, anger, optics. This is elder abuse in reverse, she blurted, wild and nonsensical. Weaponizing your age, your money, God. Paul, she's toxic. Cheryl, I said, gratitude is a language you've refused to learn. I covered your car when the last one died on the interstate. I paid tuition deposits twice. I kept your lights on when Paul hurt his back and your insurance played hide and seek. I funded vacations that were supposed to be recovery and renovations that were investments. I have receipts for all of it. And still, you looked me in the eye at dinner and asked how it feels to be a nobody. That was a joke, she snapped, instantly defensive. You're so sensitive, it was a thesis, I said. And this is my conclusion. From today on, you pay your own bills. I heard a car door slam through the phone and then through my front window. They'd driven over. Of course they had. Cheryl is a general who prefers to wage war in person. I met them on the porch. Paul looked pale and younger than his 41 years, the way he did the first time he broke his arm and couldn't understand why the world wouldn't stop for his pain. Cheryl wore her work armor, sleek bun, tailored blazer, lipstick like a warning sign. You need to reconsider, she said without hello, sweeping past me as if my threshold were a revolving door. She planted herself in my living room like she was staging it for a listing. The mortgage is due. If it's late, our credit, your credit, I corrected. I stayed standing. T, don't patronize me. Her laugh was a sharp little thing that never reached her eyes. Do you enjoy this? Hurting us? Hurting your grandchildren. Stop saying hurting, I said. Start saying consequences. I'm not shutting off anyone's food. I'm shutting off my wallet. You can DoorDash a budget. Paul flinched. Mom, we need a few days. Just until my invoice clears, and I'm not a stopgap between bad planning and next Thursday, I said. You two are adults. Figure it out. Cheryl pivoted. Fine. Let's talk about all the times we helped you, she said triumphantly, then faltered, grasping for examples. Like when we picked you up from the airport after your sister's surgery, or you mean when I paid for your gas and brought you dinner for a week to thank you? I asked. Yes, I remember. Her face flushed. You're unbelievable. You're ungrateful, I said, softer than she expected. And I trained you to be. That's on me. I thought if I kept making life softer, you'd get kinder. You didn't. You got careless. Paul rubbed his jaw, eyes on the floor. You could have talked to us first. I did, I said. For years, quietly, kindly, 100 small warnings. Let's make a plan to take this off my plate by summer. You should transfer the utilities by fall. I'll cover the last tuition bill, then you're on your own. Each time, you nodded and let the date breeze by like weather. So I set a date you can't miss. They tried different doors then: duty, legacy, fear. What about Christmas? Paul asked, genuinely bewildered. If we're struggling, we can't. Give me time with my grandkids and a walk after dinner, I said. The rest is wrapping paper. Cheryl took a step closer, lowering her voice. Listen to me. People talk. In my position, optics matter. If our street sees a notice on the door because you decided to make a point, you decided to make the point, I said, suddenly tired. At my table, you asked how it feels to be a nobody. Today, I found out how it feels to be somebody to myself. A car slowed in front of the house, my neighbor Mrs. Nguyen in her little hatchback, heading home from the market. She lifted a hand, took in the scene a stiff daughter-in-law in a blazer, a son trying to disappear into his collar, me at my own doorway, and gave me the soft, knowing nod women exchange when we recognize the heat on each other's porches. It steadied me. Cheryl noticed the glance and straightened, assembling a smile made of ice. "We'll leave," she announced, like a queen dismissing herself. "But this isn't over. If anything happens to our home, to our kids, that's on you." "Your home is on you," I said, opening the door and reminding myself not to apologize for it. "Your kids are on both of you. If anything happens to me, that's on me. That's the arrangement we should have had all along." She strode out, heels punishing the porch steps. Paul lingered, eyes finally meeting mine. For a moment I saw my boy at 8, gripping a crumpled permission slip he'd forgotten to hand me. "Mom," he said, and the word was a plea, a question, a habit. "Paul," I answered, and let the silence after his name be the lesson. He nodded once, swallowed a dozen things he might have said, and followed his wife to the car. The house exhaled when the door clicked shut. I stood in the quiet and listened to my heartbeat slow. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was a clean ache, like muscles after a long overdue stretch. The phone rang again. Leon, my accountant, didn't bother with preamble. "You okay?" "I am," I said. "They called me a family destroyer." He snorted softly. "Families don't break from budgets. They break from disrespect. You drew a line. That's carpentry, not arson." I laughed then, unexpected, relieved. "Thank you for the edits on the letters." "You did the heavy lifting," he said. "Expect the next phase, bargaining disguised as concern, then theatrics. Don't sign anything. Don't, just for this month, anything. If you need a script, call me." After we hung up, I made tea, the good jasmine Mrs. Nguyen presses into my hands when it goes on clearance, and took it to the porch. Across the street, Nora, who runs the library's adult literacy program, was unloading boxes from her trunk. She spotted me, waved with a book jacket flapping in her hand, and shouted, "You're still coming Tuesday?" "Yes," I called back. My voice felt stronger in the open air. "I am." A text pinged. "Evan, Grandma, did Dad come over?" I typed back, "Yes." We talked. "I love you." 3 dots flickered, then, "Love you too. I'll call you later." The afternoon went gold around the edges. I watered the porch fern, checked the mail, and sat again, letting the quiet settle. Somewhere inside, a small door I hadn't noticed before swung open to a room I'd never let myself enter, a place where my worth wasn't measured in transfers, approvals, or the efficiency of my rescues. There will be fallout. I know that. There always is when gravity reasserts itself. But there was also this, the clear, steady sound a boundary makes when it finally locks into place. Not a slam, a click, and then blessedly stillness. After Paul and Cheryl stormed out of my living room without so much as a backward glance, the silence in my house felt heavier than usual. I sat in my armchair with a cup of tea going cold in my hands, staring at the muted flicker of the television without hearing a single word. And just like that, my mind pulled me backward 15 years to the moment this all began. It was right after Harold died. My husband had been my anchor, my partner in everything. Losing him was like losing half of my own breath. Those first months, I was a ghost moving through my own life. Paul and Cheryl came over more often back then. They brought casseroles they called every few days. They seemed genuinely concerned. One Sunday evening, not even half a year after the funeral, they invited me over for dinner. Cheryl had made roast chicken. Paul opened a bottle of wine Harold would have liked. The air was warm with candlelight, soft music, and the kind of easy conversation I thought would become our new normal. But toward dessert, the atmosphere shifted. "Mom," Paul began, refilling my glass, "Cheryl and I have been talking about our mortgage." Cheryl leaned in, all sympathetic smiles. "We're just a little tight right now, what with the interest rates going up and the baby coming." I remember blinking at her, my spoon hovering over the creme brulee. "Are you asking for help?" "Oh, not asking," Paul said quickly, "just, if you wanted to. You've always said you want us to be secure." It was true. Harold and I had always planned to help Paul when we could. And back then, it felt good to step in. I wrote them a check for a few months' worth of payments and thought nothing of it. It was just a temporary patch for their young family. But the temporary part vanished quickly. The requests grew, first the kitchen remodel, then a newer car for the baby's safety. I paid off their credit card debt just this once. Then came private school for Evan, orthodontics, medical bills, vacations, all wrapped in the language of just until we get back on our feet. And with every check I wrote, the gratitude in their voices faded a little more. At first, there were thank you cards, flowers, a dinner out in my honor. Then the thank yous became casual mentions in passing. Eventually, they disappeared entirely. My contributions became invisible, absorbed into the narrative Paul and Cheryl built for themselves, that everything they had was the result of their own hard work. The final shift came about 5 years ago. At a family barbecue, Cheryl was telling a neighbor about their new backyard renovation. "We've worked so hard for all this," she said, without even glancing at me. "Paul's done so well at work, and I've kept everything together at home. It's been a real team effort." I stood there with a paper plate in my hands, hearing my own role erased in real time. No mention of the checks I'd written to cover their shortfall when Paul's promotion was delayed, or the thousands I'd spent so they wouldn't have to take out a second loan. Somewhere along the way, I had gone from being their safety net to their silent investor, unseen, unacknowledged, and increasingly taken for granted. Looking back now, I could see it all so clearly. Harold and I had raised Paul to believe in hard work, but I had undone that lesson myself with my own open wallet. The help I had meant to be a temporary kindness had become a lifelong entitlement. And the worst part? I had allowed it, but no more. That night, I made myself a quiet promise. I wasn't going to be the silent investor in their lives anymore. If Paul and Cheryl wanted to maintain the image they had so carefully crafted, they would have to do it with their own money. Because I was finally ready to see what happened when the safety net was gone. It took less than a week for the ripple to hit shore. On Monday morning, I saw Cheryl's SUV parked in front of their house long after she would normally have left for work. By Wednesday, Paul was spotted at the coffee shop 2 blocks over, scrolling through job listings with the grim focus of someone who just realized, between projects, doesn't pay the mortgage. By Friday, the phone calls started not from them, but from people around them. First came Aunt Lydia, her voice low and pitying. "Sabrina, I've heard you cut them off completely. They said it's been brutal. The kids might have to change schools." "They will stay in school if their parents pay the tuition," I said. "For the last 15 years, I've covered their mortgage, 2 cars, insurance, vacations, private school, medical bills. Nearly $1 million in total. I said it was temporary until they stabilized. They didn't." Aunt Lydia sputtered. "They told me I know what they told you. I cut in gently. I'm telling you the receipts." The next day, Mrs. Perry from across the street stopped me as I was trimming the hedge. She glanced around like a spy in a cheap movie. "I don't mean to pry, but Cheryl says you're forcing them into foreclosure?" I leaned on my clippers. "They've had 15 years of my financial support. Their mortgage is theirs. Their cars are theirs. Their bills are theirs. I haven't forced them into anything they didn't drive toward themselves." By the weekend, I started hearing about myself through the grapevine in my own neighborhood. Apparently, I had become cold, vindictive, the kind of mother who abandons her family for pride. The phrases had Cheryl's dramatic flair all over them, repeated and polished by anyone willing to listen. But rumors are fragile things when you arm the right people with facts. When my cousin Marlene called, ready to deliver a lecture, from her tone, I told her exactly what I'd told everyone else, adding dates, amounts, and examples. I didn't add heat to my voice, didn't editorialize. Just numbers. And numbers, I've found, are very bad at lying. Marlene went quiet. "Almost $1 million, she repeated, her voice soft. "Yes," I said. "In mortgages, cars, school fees, insurance, medical bills, and renovations. And I have bank statements for every penny. Would you like me to email them to you?" No, she said quickly. Wow, that's different from what I heard." By Tuesday, the tone of the neighborhood chatter began to shift. The story of the brutal mother started leaking at the seams as more people heard the actual scale of my help. The sympathy that had been comfortably theirs began to thin out. I overheard Mrs. Nguyen at the florist telling someone, if my son had a mother like Sabrina, I'd build her a gold statue, not complain about her in the driveway. Even Harold's old friend Joe, who has never liked me much, muttered when we passed each other at the market, "Guess they weren't as self-made as they liked to brag, huh?" That one made me pause. Because it was true, Paul and Cheryl had been crafting an image for years. The successful suburban couple with smart kids, a stylish home, and effortless charm. And I had been the invisible scaffolding holding it all up. Without me, the cracks were showing fast. Paul's consulting work dried up within days. Cheryl's company, it turned out, had been less than thrilled about her recent promotion and was reevaluating her role, polite corporate speak for "don't get too comfortable." Their bank was calling about the mortgage. One of the kids' schools had sent a letter about overdue tuition. The car lease was a month from default. They were scrambling, and people were watching. It wasn't schadenfreude I felt. Not exactly. It was more like vindication. I had been told to my face that I was a nobody. But a nobody doesn't change the course of someone's life with a single decision. And the truth? The truth travels slower than gossip, but it carries more weight when it finally arrives. I just had to be patient. By the end of that week, Paul and Cheryl's reputation as the golden couple of our circle had dulled to something far less shiny. People were starting to see, not the full truth yet, but enough to question. Enough to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the real story wasn't the one they'd been telling. And I knew, deep in my bones, this was only the beginning. By mid-September, the perfect facade Paul and Cheryl had curated for years had slipped far enough that even they couldn't pretend anymore. It started with the BMW. Cheryl loved that car, white leather interior, a paint color she described as pearl frost, like it was a gemstone. She'd insisted on leasing it instead of buying because successful people upgrade every few years. I'd covered the first year's payments as a gift and then, without ever quite agreeing, the rest. Now, with me out of the equation, a letter from the dealership arrived. Final notice. Repossession pending. Paul tried to hide it in his briefcase, but Evan found it while looking for a calculator. "Dad," he asked, pale, "what does repossession mean?" Paul mumbled something about just paperwork and shoved it away, but the seed had been planted. The kids were noticing. Maddie came home from school one afternoon to find Cheryl pacing the kitchen with the phone pressed to her ear, voice tight as wire. "We will get current, but you need to stop calling me every day. Yes, I'm aware of the late fees." She stopped mid-sentence when she saw her daughter watching. "Go do your homework," she snapped. The mortgage was worse. Without my transfers, they were 2 payments behind in less than a month. A thick envelope from the bank sat unopened on the kitchen counter for 3 days before Cheryl tore it in half and dropped it in the trash without reading it. And Paul, who had once liked to boast about his flexible consulting work, was wearing a supermarket polo shirt by the second week. Stocking shelves. Nights and weekends. I heard about it from Mrs. Perry, who saw him at the register when she was buying milk. He looked like he wanted to disappear, she told me, almost whispering, as if his humiliation was contagious. It wasn't just the money anymore, it was the mood in that house. The kids, who'd once been showered with gadgets and trips, now whispered to each other about whether they'd have to move somewhere worse. Evan asked his mother if they'd still get pizza on Fridays. Maddie wanted to know why she couldn't take dance lessons this term. And Paul and Cheryl, the shine between them was gone. One evening, with the windows open in the late summer air, I heard their voices carry down the street. "You've been spending like we have a printing press in the basement." Paul's voice was raw. "Oh, don't start," Cheryl shot back. "Who quit a perfectly good job to go freelance? Who said he could double his income in a year? You did. And then you sat back while your mother paid for everything. I told you that was temporary. You told me she'd never stop." There was a long, jagged pause, and then Paul's voice quieter. "Well, I guess I was wrong about that." It was the first time in years I'd heard either of them admit, even indirectly, that they might have done this to themselves. I sat at my kitchen table, listening to the argument trail off into the kind of silence that isn't peace, just exhaustion. For the first time, I wondered if my absence in their finances might not just save my bank account, it might finally force them to see the truth they'd been hiding from for over a decade. The question was, would they survive seeing it? The phone call from Paul came on a Tuesday evening. his voice stripped of its usual veneer of confidence. There was no fake cheer, no easy segue into whatever he wanted, just a pause, and then, "Mom, can you come over tomorrow?" Just to talk. It had been weeks since he'd asked for my presence without it being wrapped in a request for money. Something in his tone, hesitation, maybe even humility, made me agree without my usual internal debate. When I arrived the next day, the house felt smaller. Not in size, but in spirit. No music playing from the Bluetooth speaker. No smell of a slow cooker bubbling away with dinner. The blinds were half closed, casting gray stripes across the living room. Even the air felt heavier, as if all the energy had been wrung out of it. Paul was sitting at the kitchen table in a wrinkled polo shirt, a half-empty coffee mug in front of him. It looked like it had been reheated twice and abandoned. He didn't look up right away, just kept running his thumb along the rim of the cup like it might give him courage. "Thanks for coming," he said finally, his voice low. "I'm your mother," I replied, pulling out a chair across from him. "That doesn't change, even if the money does." That made him flinch, just slightly. He rubbed his temples, leaning forward. "We can't keep up. The mortgage, the cars, the tuition, it's too much. Without your help, we never could have afforded this life." I see that now. The house, the trips, the upgrades, he let out a short, humorless laugh. "We've been living in a picture we couldn't afford to frame." "Yes," I said, my voice even. "I know." He looked up then, his eyes red-rimmed. "Cheryl's furious with me. Says I should have made you see how unfair this is to the kids. That I should have, what did she say, handled you better." But I think he stopped, like the words were sharp in his mouth. "I think maybe we need to find a way forward. Something better than this mess." "That's the first sensible thing I've heard from you in years," I said. "So tell me, Paul, what does forward look like to you?" He shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. Less lying to ourselves, I guess. And a way for the kids not to suffer for our mistakes. We've been pretending for so long that I don't even remember what normal looks like." I reached across the table, not to comfort him, but to make sure he met my eyes. "If you're ready for a better way, I'll listen. But it's going to mean changing more than the bank account. It's going to mean changing you. And Cheryl. And the way you both see what you have and don't have." He nodded slowly, like he knew this wasn't a conversation that would be wrapped up neatly in one morning. And I could see in his face, he also knew Cheryl would be a harder sell than he was. The next morning, Cheryl came to my house. She arrived looking like she'd stepped out of a glossy magazine, hair smooth, lipstick perfect, blazer fitted within an inch of its life. But underneath, the cracks were there, dark circles she couldn't conceal, a tightness in her jaw that no foundation could soften. She didn't sit down when I offered. "I'm here for the children," she began, her voice clipped but measured. "They need stability. They need to stay in their school, keep their activities, their friends. We can fight later about the rest, but right now, please think about them." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "I have been thinking about them, which is why I'm willing to offer a plan. But you're not going to like all of it." Her eyes narrowed. "Go on. I will pay for the children's needs. School fees, necessary medical care, essential clothing. That's it. Not the mortgage. Not your car leases. Not vacations. Not 1 cent toward adult living expenses. You're both responsible for the life you've built for yourselves." Her lips parted in protest, but I raised a hand. "And there's another condition, a public acknowledgement. To family, to neighbors, to anyone you've told otherwise. You will admit, clearly, that my help funded your lifestyle for the past 15 years. And you will acknowledge that you erased that. I will not be invisible anymore." Her composure slipped for just a moment, and I saw the flash of humiliation in her eyes. "You want me to humiliate myself," she said coldly. "I want you to tell the truth," I replied. "Call it whatever you like. But without it, there's no deal." She shifted her weight, clutching her purse strap like it was a lifeline. "You know how that would look." People would know the truth," I interrupted. "And if that's unbearable, then perhaps the truth isn't the problem. Perhaps the life you've built on top of it is." For a long moment, she said nothing, only pressing her lips into a thin, bloodless line. Then she turned on her heel. "I'll think about it." That evening, Paul called again. His voice was quiet, almost resigned. "I don't know if I can convince her," he admitted. She's proud. And she's terrified of people seeing the cracks. Then that's your first real job, I said. Convince her or live with the alternative. My terms won't change. There was a pause, and then, softly, I think you're right. About all of it. When I hung up, I didn't feel triumph. Just the solid weight of a boundary drawn in ink instead of pencil. And I knew the next move was theirs. Paul waited until after dinner to tell her. The kids had drifted upstairs, Maddie with her earbuds in, Evan claiming he had homework, but clearly scrolling on his phone from the blue glow under his door. The air in the dining room still smelled faintly of reheated pasta, the kind of half-effort meal they'd been eating more often lately. Paul lingered in the doorway to the kitchen, shoulders rounded, fingers tapping lightly against the frame. He didn't want to say it. I could picture it perfectly in my mind, how the words sat in his throat like stones. She's willing to help, he said finally. His voice was low, careful, but only for the kids. Tuition, medical stuff, clothes. Nothing else. Cheryl didn't look up from her plate. That's something. There's more, Paul said. She wants us to admit, publicly, that she's been supporting us. All these years. Cheryl's fork clattered against the porcelain, the sound loud in the quiet room. Absolutely not. She's not budging, Cheryl. It's the only way she'll agree. Then there is no way. Cheryl shoved her chair back, the legs scraping against the tile. Do you have any idea how that would look? We'd be the joke of every school fundraiser, every neighborhood cookout. People would see us as frauds. Paul hesitated. We've kind of been living a fraud, haven't we? Her eyes flashed. Don't you dare. Don't you stand there and act like I forced you into this. You loved the vacations. You drove those cars. You agreed to every single upgrade. You wanted this life as much as I did. And we can't afford it, Paul said simply. Not without her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, without another word, Paul crossed to the small desk in the living room. He pulled out a notepad and began writing numbers in a neat, mechanical hand. His current supermarket wages, Cheryl's shrinking salary, the mortgage payment, 2 car leases, insurance, utilities, school, tuition, credit card, debt. Cheryl hovered over his shoulder. Arms folded so tightly across her chest it looked painful. We can cut cable, she offered. Cancel the gym. Sell some of my jewelry. We can. Paul shook his head. Even if we cut everything, Netflix, dinner's out. Your car, our car, she cut in sharply. Fine. Our car. Even if we get rid of every single extra, we're still short by over $1,000 a month. That's without touching the debt. Cheryl pressed her lips together until they turned white. We just need more time. Paul's voice was flat. We have 36 hours before I have to call the school and the bank. If we don't make a decision, they'll make it for us. Silence spread between them, heavy and stale. They started talking again in fits and starts, short bursts of blame and defense, the same arguments looping over each other. Cheryl accused Paul of quitting his stable job to go freelance without a safety net. Paul accused her of pushing for every big purchase, every renovation, every vacation they couldn't afford. Somewhere upstairs, a door creaked open. Evan padded down the stairs for a glass of water and froze when he saw his mother's face, red-eyed and wet, her mascara smudged into faint bruises under her eyes. Are we moving? He asked quietly. No, Cheryl said too quickly. Go to bed, sweetheart. But her voice had that brittle tone kids recognize immediately. Evan lingered, shifting his weight from foot to foot before retreating upstairs. Maddie appeared in the hallway a few minutes later, pretending to rummage in the coat closet. Why were you crying? She asked her mother softly. Nothing you need to worry about, Cheryl said, shutting the closet door herself. Go upstairs, honey. The children's door shut again, but not before they'd heard enough to know something was badly wrong. Later that night, Paul was still at the table. The notepad sat in front of him, covered in figures circled and crossed out, the ink smudged where he'd rubbed at it with his thumb. Cheryl was upstairs, the sound of her muffled crying leaking through the floorboards. Paul stared at the numbers like they might shift if he waited long enough. He knew they wouldn't. 36 hours. That's all they had to decide whether they'd swallow their pride or watch their carefully curated life collapse in front of their children. And for the first time since I'd cut them off, I think Paul finally understood this wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the story they'd been telling the world, and whether they had the courage to rewrite it before it fell apart completely. It was late afternoon when I saw their SUV pull up outside my house. All four of them got out, Paul in a worn jacket, Cheryl holding Maddie's hand, Evan trailing behind with his hood up. They walked up my path as a group, but their pace was uneven, like they weren't entirely sure they wanted to be here. When I opened the door, I was ready for another round of persuasion, or worse, accusations. What I wasn't ready for was Cheryl speaking first. "We've talked," she began, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "And we're here to say we were wrong." She glanced at Paul, who nodded. "We've been ungrateful, careless, and we've spoken about you in ways we shouldn't have. We've let pride get in the way of the truth." Paul stepped forward. "Mom, you were right. About all of it. We can't pretend anymore. We agree to your terms, help for the kids only, and the acknowledgement. Public acknowledgement. We'll tell everyone what you've done for us. No more hiding it." Evan shifted uncomfortably, but didn't argue. Maddie kept her eyes on the ground, clutching Cheryl's hand. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, letting their words settle. Finally, I stepped aside and motioned them in. "Let's sit." We gathered at my dining table, the same table where, months ago, Cheryl had asked me how it felt to be a nobody. Today, there was no mockery in her voice. "I'll make one exception today," I said once we were all seated. "I'll cover your last overdue mortgage payment. It will stop the immediate foreclosure and give you breathing room. But hear me clearly, this is the final time I will pay for your home, cars, or lifestyle expenses. This one is a lifeline, not a ladder." Paul nodded. "We understand." Cheryl's eyes were red, but she held my gaze. "We do." I slid a folder onto the table. Inside was my written agreement, plain and direct. My financial help will be strictly for the children's needs: tuition, necessary medical care, essential clothing. Monthly family meetings to discuss finances, goals, and progress. Complete transparency in money matters, no hidden debts, no surprise expenses disguised as something for the kids. Mutual respect at all times, in public and in private. No more erasing my contributions. "These aren't suggestions," I said. "They're conditions. If any of them are broken, the support stops. No negotiation." They both nodded, and for the first time in years, I saw something in their expressions I hadn't seen before. Not relief, not gratitude exactly, but the beginning of sincerity. We spent the next hour in conversation that, surprisingly, felt constructive. We went over the children's upcoming needs, the debts they would handle themselves, and even discussed ways they might rebuild without leaning on me. Paul asked questions instead of making excuses. Cheryl listened more than she interrupted. When they left, Evan gave me a quick hug, awkward but real. Maddie whispered, "Thank you, Grandma," before following her parents out the door. I stood at the window and watched them go, feeling the faintest stirrings of hope. It wasn't forgiveness yet, and it certainly wasn't trust, not entirely. But it was movement. And after 15 years of running in circles, movement felt like the first real gift we'd given each other in a long time. 3 months later, the rhythm of our lives had changed slower, steadier, and far less theatrical than before. The difference was visible in a dozen small ways. Paul called me on a Sunday afternoon, his voice lighter than it had been in years. "I've got news, Mom. I got promoted. Assistant manager. It's not glamorous, but it's steady, and it comes with a raise." I could hear the quiet pride in his tone, the kind that comes from earning something without shortcuts. Cheryl, too, had changed. When I stopped by their house one afternoon, I saw a whiteboard on the fridge covered in neat columns: groceries, utilities, tuition, savings. She caught me looking at it and gave a sheepish smile. "I've been learning to plan the budget. We even have an emergency fund now, small, but it's something." The children were thriving. Evan had joined the school soccer team and spent weekends practicing with friends. Maddie was deep into gymnastics, her face lighting up every time she showed me a new move. They spoke with excitement about tournaments, school projects, and goals that had nothing to do with fancy vacations or expensive gadgets. At our monthly family meeting, we sat around my dining table, coffee for the adults, cookies for the kids, and Paul gave me a small printed report. Just so you know where we're at. Mortgage is current, tuition is paid, no missed fills. We're on track. Cheryl added, I want to thank you for helping with the kids when we needed it. And for not giving in on everything else. I didn't see it then, but you were right. We had to face what we were doing to ourselves. They also told me about a new plan. In a year or two, they'd sell the big house and buy something smaller, easier to maintain, with a mortgage they could actually afford. We want to live within our means, Paul said. No more chasing an image. As I listened, I felt something warm and solid settle in my chest. Pride, not the smug kind, but the kind that feels earned on both sides. My tough decision hadn't destroyed them. It had forced them to rebuild from the foundation up. I realized then that the real revenge hadn't been cutting them off, it had been watching them change. Seeing them learn, grow, and find stability without leaning on me like an endless safety net. Punishment is easy. Transformation is harder. And in the end, transformation is sweeter.